Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I'm joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
Hey, hey, it's going well.
I'm also joined by Porfirio Rangel. Porfirio, how goes?
It's going all good, you guys. I'm back in the Bay Area, so now I could be like, the weather is fine, and you guys would understand.
Yes,
Welcome
we're in.
back.
Yeah, welcome back. All right, today is December 8th, 2024. And before the year's over, we wanted to celebrate Godzilla because 2024 marks the 70th anniversary of Godzilla. So we're going to talk all about Godzilla today. And to do that, Christian's going to moderate. So Christian, take it away.
All right, thank you, Henry. So yeah, as you were saying, we were going to talk all about Godzilla for the 70th anniversary. The first movie premiered in Japan and on October 27th, 1954. And since then, there have been 38 films in the Godzilla franchise.
Wow.
Godzilla's become like or has been since that first movie, a pretty major Japanese pop culture icon. And having such a long movie franchise, you could say Godzilla is similar to, say, James Bond in the UK or Superman in the United States. Just a timeless character that has lots of movies and an enduring fan base. Godzilla also very much reflects on a lot of Japanese kind of social and political themes that kind of happen throughout its many years, as it's very well known. Uh, there's a big allegory for nuclear weapons with it, and but since then we've had various different Godzilla films and various different ways of this character, ranging from very very serious to very very goofy. Um, Not not to mention, Godzilla is a character that the films not only are made in Japan, very many recently, as we'll probably get into later, are made in the United States. And so each of us picked three different Godzilla films, one each, or each of us picked one film. So we have three that we want to talk about to kind of span the entire history. So I think we'll start with Porfirio and we'll go in chronological order. Porfirio, you picked the very first Godzilla movie. So why don't you take it away and tell us about your experience watching it?
Yeah, so I picked the OG Godzilla movie, the one that came out in 94, October 94, and it was
For
fun.
correction, that the original was 1954, correct?
What did I say?
Oh, you said 94.
Oh my
Right.
God, yeah, 54.
There
I'm
you go.
tripping. Yeah, yeah, 1954. And yeah, this was the movie that birthed the whole franchise, and it was released in Japan, black and white, and you could just tell it was made from the 50s. This was a time when they had somebody in a Godzilla suit kind of just walk around and destroy small home modules and come out of the ocean, and just the effects were very like as of an elementary student, we did worked on it on iMovie or something. Like, yeah, the effects weren't the best, but it's definitely like the base and spirit of what Godzilla is, and just what has made has is why the character has lived for 70 years, for as long as it has. You know, it touches on themes about a nuclear holocaust and hydrogen testing and um just all these fears that Japan had at the time. So it is a hard movie to watch again just because of the storyline and the graphics, but I feel like if you're a Godzilla fan, you just gotta start at the beginning and just be able to appreciate this movie for what it is.
Yeah. Um, I definitely agree. I haven't seen this movie in many, many years. Uh, I do agree. It's definitely a movie I would say you appreciate over something you enjoy, whereas as opposed to I guess some of the more recent ones, because yeah, it is very dated, but it is still pretty well made, I would say,
Hmm.
for the time, and it is cool to see. I think there's a lot of CGI in these movies nowadays, so it's cool to see the sets, the miniatures, Godzilla, yeah, as like a person in the suit rampaging, and the black and white I think does help it a lot. It
Hmm.
gives it a very moody atmosphere.
Yeah, and again, like you can see, like I guess, like the beginnings or first of all these like things that we love about Godzilla. Like you can see the first time it does its atomic breath, that music, when it's like "Da-na-na, na-na-na, na-na-na, na-na-na-na-na," it's like so epic. It's like it uses the music a few times throughout the film. Like one time it's like for like an evacuation scene, which is so weird because I feel like most times when we think of that music, we think of it as kind of like a battle scene. So
Hmm.
for it to be used in that way was an interesting choice. But again, like you see all these like things that you could easily reference in later Godzilla movies. So it's cool just to see how it all first started.
Yeah. Quick note on the visual effects. Yes, the visual effects are dated, as you might think from a movie from 1954. But I would argue the look of the movie is actually pretty decent. We talked about the black and white making it kind of a little more classy looking, and I think it doesn't look as dated as some of the subsequent dude in a rubber suit Godzilla movies we saw later, because those are like in color, like fully lit, like and it looks like a bunch of dudes in rubber suits fighting in a dirt lot, basically, right? But this movie is in black and white. They use shadows effectively, and the Godzilla character is sort of shown sparingly. So yes, the look and the effects are dated, but kind of what we've been saying, it's a well-made movie, and
Hmm.
in addition to that, it has a pretty strong social commentary to it, which again, like I think that sort of lost its way a little bit later on when the movies became a little more exploitation. But yeah, this first one I think is pretty special. Like it's done well. It has all the iconic Godzilla stuff, the atomic breath, the musical score, and the
The roar.
iconic the roar. Yeah, all the iconic signature moments from Godzilla, right? You get them in this first movie. It's really cool. So I think there's a lot of charm to this one.
Hmm. Did you know, as I was doing my research for this movie, that two kind of things stood out. One was when this movie was first pitched, the original design for Godzilla was actually going to be like an octopus,
Mm.
Ah, I didn't know that.
but uh it got kind of confusing why it kind of got shut down. 'Cause something about like the original film production, the Japanese film production that was going to do this was going to do it with an Indian production, but that deal never went through. And so when that deal didn't go through, the design of the octopus kind of like fell through, and so they kind of like went like the, dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Stegosaurus combo look that we now know, Godzilla.
Hmm.
And even in the movie, we kind of, think of Godzilla as like this, giant monster kaiju, but I don't think we've ever kind of, at least for me, thought of Godzilla as like a dinosaur or anything, but this
Hmm.
movie does kind of categorize Godzilla as a dinosaur, saying that like it lived during this Jurassic period and it was like in this like asleep, and all the hydrogen testing woke it up from its slumber, and all these other creatures that kind of leached itself to Godzilla came onto the mainland that were from the Jurassic period. So like, I guess like some of the early theories that the scientists had from the film believed that Godzilla lived from the Jurassic period, therefore categorizing it as a dinosaur.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I think that's something that's probably been. I guess they've kind of changed it here and there
Hmm.
throughout the different movies, but it's cool to see like some things that have largely kind of stayed the same with the franchise,
Yeah.
and how there's always like kind of that nuclear angle.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Godzilla like slumbers beneath the ocean. I guess you could almost say, when you mentioned an octopus, I thought, oh, it's kind of like the Kraken.
Hmm. I was thinking
Like
that too.
they might have kind of thought of it more as something like that. Because I think this movie does also have a pretty big element of the sea to it, right? I'm trying to
Right.
remember. I know he's known for destroying Tokyo, but he does come out of the sea. There's like, does the final scene in this one take place? It also takes place on the water, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it spoiler alert, even though this movie has been out for 70 years. Yeah, it takes place in the sea because the way they are able to kill Godzilla is not a hydrogen bomb, but an oxygen bomb, which I guess um takes away destroys all the oxygen molecules in the water, and therefore like vaporizing anything in it, which is how they kill Godzilla.
Yeah, speaking of that, another signature of Godzilla movies is the use of science. And they definitely did that with the original, where military might is never enough to stop Godzilla. It always takes a brilliant scientist to figure out some sort of trick to defeat Godzilla, right? And that's always a big part of the fun of these Godzilla movies is figuring out how to do it and using science to do that, right? So that's cool. I like the fact that they did that from the very beginning.
Yeah. Oh,
So yeah, it was a movie that I enjoyed, and like I said, any Godzilla fan needs to just go to the base and just watch it. So should I do a rating, Christian?
yeah. Why don't you give it a rating? How do you feel about Godzilla out of 5?
Out of five for the OG Godzilla movie, I give it a 4. I just sound like a broken record here. Like it is very dated, and it took me a few tries to just get through it. But it's the OG movie, the movie that started this whole Godzilla franchise and has become a Godzilla popular culture phenomenon throughout the world. Like you got to just respect the original content, the original source, and why it's such a beloved character. And that's the only yeah, so it's really high up there just because of nostalgia and the cultural impact, but just minus one just because of that like outdated, like hard to get through kind of thing. but
Yeah.
highly recommend.
All right. So next up, we'll go to the movie I picked. So the movie I picked was also called Godzilla. So this movie was American made. It was made in 1998, and it's directed by the Roland Emmerich. So this movie is one that both I think Porfirio mentioned it too, but this is kind of my entry into the franchise that I got. I was a kid back in 1996, 6-year-old, and really wanted to go see this movie. And back then in 1996, I thought this movie was a blast. I loved it as a kid. I had the toys. There was a cartoon show I watched. There was like I was just that was my entry point into the fandom. So while it's not the first Godzilla, it's the first Godzilla for me and probably many, many fans as well. But this movie is also seen as one of the worst Godzillas. I think a lot of people really have come to strongly dislike this movie, and I think with some of our earlier podcasts, we did a podcast on the Phantom Menace, and we did one on ABP. Two other movies that I think have a lot of strong dislikes within the fan base, but we came out pretty positively on both those movies. Revisiting them, I quite liked rewatching both of them. So I thought, hey, let's give this one a try. Let's try rewatching this one and see how well it holds up. And unfortunately, this one is as bad as everyone says. I did not like this movie at all. This movie is terrible. Um, so this movie stars Matthew Broderick, and he is a scientist. I think he is a biologist, and the movie starts with him. Also, with nuclear energy, he's seeing that worms have started to have been growing, and he's starting to see many, many, and they're that kind of snowballs into this idea that nuclear energy is causing animals to grow and change and evolve. And so they start following Godzilla, and then Godzilla, rather than coming to Tokyo, comes to New York and rampages through New York. And of course, there's two different angles to this movie. First, you have kind of Matthew Broderick and the scientist government angle, and he teams up with a secret. I think it's like French special forces with the agent played by Jean Reno, and then of course, the other half of the movie is kind of the like newscaster angle. It follows Maria Patillo and her kind of and Hank Azaria as like those two kind of like they follow Godzilla because they're trying to shoot him for the news and follow the news with kind of the two sides intertwining here and there. And so um yeah, like as I've said, uh, this movie is pretty terrible and about as bad as everyone says. There's of course there's not the Godzilla of is kind of the big reason Godzilla's been changed. Godzilla's a lot smaller in this movie than Godzilla is known to be in other movies and looks way different. I think uh, in other forms of media they've just called this version Zilla as if this movie he's not the real Godzilla. He's just Zilla. He's the offshoot. And Jurassic Park also came a few years before this movie, and I think they really wanted the hatchling scene. So Godzilla actually kind of quote unquote dies halfway through the movie, comes back for the final bit, and so because Godzilla lays eggs throughout New York, and I think like and of course they hatch so they can have like little Godzilla hatchlings kind of running around. So you have a little too bit too many human characters. You have Godzilla dying, and you have Godzilla's hatchlings take up a good portion of the movie. So there really isn't enough of your title character in the movie. A title character that people really don't like as well. And you kind of have the human angle, like of course they spend too much time on it. And I think with a lot of Godzilla movies, a common complaint is that they don't like the human characters.
Hmm.
And these are kind of annoying. I think the newscaster angle that I was talking about takes up a lot of this movie, and it feels a bit like you're watching a different movie at the beginning, the way it plays out. And it feels a bit too like you're watching the setup of almost like a rom-com type of movie about this girl just trying to make it in New York at this news broadcast, and it definitely feels a little out of place. And so you have that, and while we were talking about this, the 1954 movie looking very dated on the visual effects, you could almost say that this movie looks even more dated because this was in the very early beginnings of CGI, and they put a lot of
Mm.
CGI action in this movie. Some of it actually works, I think, when Godzilla's on screen, and some of it does kind of work, but a lot of it does look very bad. It's very dated looking, and I think you can't appreciate the same way you can appreciate the miniatures and the guy in the suit because it just sticks out even more. It's very uncanny looking, especially with the raptor hatchling scene or Godzilla hatchling scene. There's a shot where you see like 40 of these hatchlings, and it just looks like mud. It is terrible looking. And so, um, let's see. Yeah, this movie and something that was just kind of funny, but also really took me out of the movie. This is just kind of more of a this is a little more nitpicky. This movie features um, both. I mentioned Hank Azaria from The Simpsons and Harry Shearer. Apparently, this movie also features Nancy Cartwright as well, but I don't recall seeing her. So Um, Harry Shearer is known does plays a lot of different characters on The Simpsons. Quite notably for this movie, Kent Brockman, who's the newscaster on The Simpsons, which he plays a newscaster on this movie. And so you get lots of clips of him as his news anchor, or whether up front or in the background. And he sounds just like Kent Brockman. And it's really funny to hear and kind of watch, but it kind of takes you out because you can't help but think of The Simpsons while you're watching this movie, and it's kind of, like, unintentionally hilarious, like, it seems this movie's kinda weirdly miscast in a few different ways as w but
That's
I just thought
funny.
that was kinda funny, but the movie's kinda so bad, it's almost, like, kind of a good thing because it kinda makes you giggle.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Christian.
Yeah.
So I know historically Roland Emmerich has done some pretty exciting movies like Independence Day, and he's kind of known for being a decent action director and a director who is able to shoot some pretty exciting disaster scenes, right? Did Was there at least that appeal of this movie at all? Was there any good action? Was there any good destruction in the movie?
That that actually is, I will say that. While the CGI does look pretty dated for the time, or look dated now and it's very of its time, there is a couple good kind of sequences. The sequences with Godzilla in New York are actually yeah, they're actually fun to watch. Um, at the very end, or towards the end of the movie, you think Godzilla's dead. I guess spoilers, but no one cares about this movie, so whatever. Um,
Yeah.
you think Godzilla's dead, and the heroes get away from the hatchlings, but Godzilla shows back up just like at the end for one big final action scene. And so you have all the characters get into a car and drive through the streets of New York as Godzilla's like chasing them. And that scene actually is a lot of fun.
Mm.
Um, Godzilla, because that you get um, Godzilla trying to eat the car and has the car in his mouth, and they're trying to get out, and they're trying to do they're trying to run away, and like you have the military on the phone saying they're going to nuke the city, and they're like, no, 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 we have to get out. So there's a bit of tension there actually, and so that was actually pretty fun. That was probably the best part of the movie, like one of the only good parts, as well as like a part kind of towards the beginning where Godzilla initially shows up through New York and starts rampaging through the streets. And while Godzilla is too small for the movie, it is kind of cool that they do use the height a little bit cleverly in a couple spots. How they have to move through the buildings to get to Godzilla, and Godzilla is able to like hide behind the buildings and dodge the missiles. Like Godzilla's a little more nimble in this movie than he's more known for. So he does a couple shots where he does like dodge these missiles from the choppers, and so there is some good destruction. That's probably the only good part of this movie is when Godzilla is on screen causing destruction, and so I'd say that, yeah.
Well, at
I
least
was
there's that.
Yeah.
I
Go ahead, Porfirio.
I remember Christian a while back. I read that because you mentioned that this Godzilla version, who's also known as Zilla, was in Godzilla Final Wars.
Oh yeah, that is true.
Mm.
Yeah, and I read that there was, I think, like a trilogy was gonna be started by TriStar Studios with this version, but they end up canceling it, and so I think they just like let this character, like their rights to it, kind of just expire. So then the Japanese company that owns the Godzilla franchise bought those rights to this character and renamed the character Zilla. And so there is a confrontation between Zilla and Godzilla in Final Wars. And you just have like, yeah, like Godzilla versus like this like CGI Zilla. And you talk about that like fast mobility by Zilla, and like it's so funny, yeah, like Zilla like makes like this like lunge at Godzilla, and Godzilla like just like hits him in midair with like his tail and then just kills him with his atomic breath. And
Nice.
it's like a very fast, like blink and you miss it kind of battle.
The untimely. But I think that's very appropriate for this version of the character. Yeah,
There you go.
going up against the real thing and pretty much getting one-shotted.
Well, Christian, obviously you really enjoyed this one. What would you rate Godzilla 98?
Yep, Godzilla 98, the first American stab at Godzilla. This is definitely a 1 out of 5. Um, do not recommend it. This movie is pretty garbage. Uh, but it is, like I said, I guess a positive is that, you know, it got many people, including myself, into the franchise. It almost works as an entry point for kids born in the 90s
hmm
into Godzilla.
Yeah, speaking of that, I guess I want to give this question to Henry really fast. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Christian said, like this was a movie that introduced me and him to the Godzilla franchise. So we were kids, we didn't know better. But Henry, like, yeah, like what were your thoughts when you came out of that theater watching it back in 99 or 98 when this movie came out?
Yeah, I did see this movie in 1998 in the movie theater, and I was not a fan of it. In fact, I have not seen it since. That's why I was kind of asking Christian about like, oh, how does the action hold up, that sort of thing, because I really don't remember. I haven't seen it since then. I remember very little, other than the fact that I did not like it. Um, I
Now,
wasn't like a big Godzilla fanboy at the time. I was exposed to Godzilla at an early age,
mhm.
but yeah, I wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to see this, and was disappointed. It was just more like, oh, I saw a shitty movie, and that was the end of it, basically.
So it wasn't like, back to our Phantom Menace conversation. It wasn't like, I don't know what I saw. I need to let it marinate. Like, or like you just were like straight up like, no, this movie sucked.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, very much unlike, very unlike Phantom Menace, because Phantom Menace I went in with super high expectations. I could not wait to see it, right?
Hmm.
This one, yeah. Again, I was exposed to Godzilla, but I wasn't a huge Godzilla fan at the time. So I was disappointed in seeing a shitty movie, but not like completely heartbroken because I had high expectations or anything like that. Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to the
Yeah,
third and final? All
I think
right.
it's time. Yeah, take it away, Henry.
Cool. So, yeah, I like how we're framing the conversation here because we're spanning a long time, right? So we started in 1954 with the original Godzilla, cut to 1998, decades later, with Hollywood's first crack at our favorite monster, and then cut to just last year, 2023, Godzilla Minus One. And I guess maybe I should say 2024, because specifically I'm going to be talking about the black and white version of Godzilla Minus One, which technically released this year as part of the 70th anniversary of Godzilla. And first off, spoiler alert, this one is a pretty recent release, so I think there's a legitimate reason to give a spoiler alert here. So, spoiler alert on Godzilla Minus One. And, I just thought of this, like, I think today. Why is this movie called Godzilla Minus One? Do you guys know why it's called Godzilla Minus One?
No, I don't.
No, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mm-mm.
didn't either. I had to look it up. But apparently, it's a reference to World War II, where after World War II, the country of Japan was completely beat down, right? They were basically like starting from scratch, starting from zero, right? And in this movie, a beat down, war torn country of Japan is beat down further by the introduction of, yeah, Godzilla. They, after all the shit they've been through, then they get Godzilla, hence minus one. They're like knocked down
Mm,
another peg. So that's what the minus one is in reference to, apparently. So
mm,
kind of an interesting origin. It's sort of a marketing like, gimmick kind of title, right? But it is an interesting explanation. So there's that. And then furthering the gimmicky marketing is the decolorized version I saw not long ago. And that one is known as Godzilla Minus One Minus C, right? Minus color. So
oh, okay.
they're really getting gimmicky here. Um, so first off, I just want to speak to the black and white version. So I would say you don't necessarily need to watch the black and white version. It is kind of cool. I think it's worth watching, but you don't have to watch it. I think that's how I would categorize it. It's kind of a cool variant version of the movie, and I guess it is appropriate that they decided to release it on the 70th anniversary because it really does harken back to the original 1954 Godzilla movie. It makes it look more like that movie, and in a movie where they draw upon a lot of the same themes and the same kind of plot points. The black and white look of it makes it even closer to the original. So if you really want this like full circle moment, yeah, I think it's worth checking out the black and white, aka decolorized version of Godzilla Minus One. Besides that, it's the same movie. There's no like additional scenes or anything like that, and it really is the same movie. It's just a slight different aesthetic to it. So okay, Godzilla Minus One. Um, yeah, man, like we didn't get the opportunity to do a full podcast episode on this movie after we all saw it last year. So I'm glad we're able to cover it in some way here, because it is a fantastic movie. This movie is like the ultimate Godzilla movie. Is it the greatest Godzilla movie ever made? I mean, that's a big statement because there are a lot of Godzilla movies out there, a lot of great Godzilla movies out there. But at the very least, this one's in the conversation because it is a great, great movie. Um, First and foremost, we've already talked about like the human element in Godzilla movies, and the consensus is for the most part the appeal of Godzilla movies isn't the human characters, right? The human characters, for the most part, in the legacy of Godzilla movies, is like a necessary part of getting to the monster action, right? It's like, okay, let's get through this exposition. Let's get through these talking heads. Let's get through the military people and the scientists talking about the situations to set up the monster action. Like that's kind of how it is. And some of the best thrills of the human characters in these movies is watching Godzilla kill these humans, right? I mean, let's be honest, it's part of the fun, right? Um, so, decades and decades of Godzilla movies, we've seen this, and the world has enjoyed watching that stuff. I'm part of it. We're all part of it. We all love it, right? And I feel like in the 2014 Hollywood Godzilla movie, they made an attempt to take the human characters um, up a notch, like develop them more and have the human storylines be a little more important, right? And it kind of backfired, right? I feel like that attempt made it, to be honest, kind of a boring movie, right? And then what did we see? Almost like as a result of that, we get King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus Kong, Godzilla X Kong, and it was kind of back to formula, right? The human characters were very like one-dimensional, and they just serve the purpose of getting to the next monster action scene, and audiences weren't complaining, right? Like they were more fun. Those movies are a lot more fun than the 2014 Hollywood Godzilla, right? But then we have Godzilla Minus One, and this changed the game, man, because yes, it does have great Godzilla monster action, no question. But in addition to that, it has a very gripping human story with a huge emotional impact. And we really haven't seen this before. So watching it for the first time last year, it was I almost like didn't know how to react, right? Because before it was like, oh, let's get through the human dialogue scenes. Let's just, let's it's a necessary evil. Let's just get to like the Godzilla action, right? But here I was watching this completely, into the human story. Like I didn't want to cut to Godzilla, right? I wanted to see how these human storylines played out. So Kudos to this movie for doing that, which is like quite an accomplishment in itself. Um, and that becomes like a big theme of the movie. Like it has human characters that we actually care about, and a big theme in this movie is the valuing of human life, right? It's a big part of the movie, and it's odd to have that theme in a Godzilla movie, right? Godzilla movies are not about valuing human life. It's actually quite the opposite, right? It's like enjoying watching humans die quite often, right? So it's like this weird paradox, right? And it's this movie really flipped all that on its head. And there's a great character, Dr. Noda, in this movie. So we've been talking about like the brilliant scientists who figure out how to defeat Godzilla. Like there's a whole legacy of that in Godzilla movies, right? So he's that guy in this movie, Dr. Noda. And I love this character. He's probably my favorite character in the movie, because not only does he figure out how to defeat Godzilla, he has these like pretty cool presentations of how he wants to do it throughout the movie. But he also has these great speeches about like human life and sacrifice and everything. And he has this great line about like this is near the end of the movie when the people of Japan are getting ready to take on Godzilla. And he's talking about how this is not a battle to the death, but rather a battle to live for the future. So what a powerful message. I love it so much. And you know, in this film franchise where we've seen like almost an apathy, a disregard for human life. Here's a guy who's saying, like, we don't want a single one of you to die. We value human life. And oh man, it's just such a powerful statement. And and I have to be honest, like I did shed tears watching this movie a second time. Like this is when I watched it recently in black and white. I had already seen the movie in color with you guys last year, but I did shed tears watching it like on my couch a few weeks ago. It's that powerful movie. It's so good. Um, and okay, so I started with the human stuff, right? So I alluded to it, but there's great monster action too. Like this isn't like a movie just about human characters. It's not like the boring 2014 Godzilla where like you're like waiting and waiting for the action scenes to happen, and when they do it's like yeah, it's okay, right? No, the action is really awesome in this movie. uh we talked about all the signatures of Godzilla movies. This one has them all. It's got the atomic breath. It's got Godzilla destroying Tokyo. It's got the iconic classic look of Godzilla. This is not the Godzilla of 1998, right? This is the classic iconic character design from the original. It's got Godzilla versus the military. It's got uh, Godzilla, a lot of like water battle stuff. So yeah, again, going back to the original one, there are a lot of parallels with the 54 movie with this one. Um, yeah, I was thinking there's not much to dislike at all with this movie. It's really a really well made film. I was trying to like nitpick and see, oh, is there anything like I didn't like about this at all? The only thing I could think of is, and maybe this isn't necessarily a negative, but some of the acting is a little bit over the top, like overly like melodramatic. But even that, I know why they did that. They they had the whole style of the movie is in the vein of the original. And the 1950s in Japan, like that's how actors acted in movies. You look at uh like Seven Samurai or Hidden Fortress from Akira Kurosawa. Like that's how acting was done back then. And yes, the original Godzilla movies, that's how they did it. So it was a stylistic choice, right? It's not really how acting is done these days in movies. Like movie acting nowadays, it's much more subtle. It's almost like too subtle, right? You have to turn the subtitles on and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of like yelling and crying in the performances. This which could be considered overacting. Yeah. But again, I think there's a reason for it. And it does, again, harken back to the original Godzilla film. So I'm kind of rambling here, but I can't say enough about Godzilla Minus One. I am giving this one a 5 out of 5 rating, and I just love it so much.
Yeah, well said. And I think I echo pretty much everything that you said, because we all watched this together in the theater and we all left thinking, wow, that was probably the best Godzilla movie. Um, and I think that, coming watching it about a year later, um, it still holds up as the best. I think that, it's not just a recency bias with this one.
Yeah.
And like I will say it probably has arguably the best Godzilla scene. There's a lot of great Godzilla scenes, but I think that the scene where they're in the boat on the water and
Mm,
Godzilla's chasing them through the water, and they're like dropping these old mines to try to slow him down, but that's not working. I will say is like one of the most tense moments in a Godzilla movie.
and then the music plays.
Yeah, you got the music plays, like, you just see his, like and you see, like, his eyes,
Hmm.
and they're just, like they just pierce your soul,
Hmm.
um, as he's just moving through the water, and it's like, "Wow, this is so intense," and like you said, Edward, you really do love the human characters, you really do
Yeah.
like, you do connect with them, and so I think because you like these characters, there's so much more weight added to these scenes. Like, you're not really sure. It's like, "Man, I hope these guys get out. Man, I really wanna see them live and see what they do next." Even
Yeah.
though in most movies, monster movies, you're like, "Oh, they're the fodder," you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But now you don't want them to be.
Yeah. Oh,
But
and on that note, I wanted to add too, there's a great scene at the very end of the movie. And another great character is the central character in the movie, Koichi, who is the former kamikaze pilot, right? So at the end of the movie, again, spoiler alert, this is a big moment. Um, Koichi is in his plane, loaded up with a bomb, and he's flying at Godzilla. And the scene is very tense, and they draw it out, and it's a great moment because number one, you don't know what is going to happen. Is there are a number of outcomes that could have happened, and you just like when I first saw it for the first time, I was literally like, I do not know what's going to happen. Number two, I did not know what I wanted to happen either, right? So in past Godzilla movies, I totally would be rooting for Godzilla. I'd be like, let's just kill the humans, go Godzilla, do your thing, right? But the storyline for this character in particular was like, this guy can't die. Like that was a big part of the movie where he's a guy, he was like a disgraced kamikaze pilot. He refused, he kind of chickened out, right? He chose not to do his duty and ended up surviving, and his survival was like almost a disgrace. Like it was, people were like were like looked down upon him because he did not sacrifice himself for his country. So over the course of the movie, like you get to see that this guy is like he needs to live. He needs to live for his family. He needs to live for his friends, and the, he is of value, right? So you don't want to see him die because of that. At the same time, I love Godzilla and I'm always rooting for Godzilla, so I don't want to see Godzilla die either. So I was like completely at odds. I was like, I don't know what I want to happen, and I was just like on pins and needles, like what is going to happen? I don't know. And in a lot of ways, the ending was perfect because this character that we've gotten to know and love, he successfully completes his mission by destroying Godzilla, and he exercises his demons, and he realizes like, okay, my life is worth living. He's reunited with his family. There's a happy ending. And in addition to that, guess what, Godzilla fans? Godzilla was destroyed in that scene, but there's a little hint at the very, very, very end of the movie where it appears that Godzilla is not done yet. So, um, in true Godzilla fashion, Godzilla movie fashion, he's not actually dead, right? Godzilla will live on for eternity. So, in addition to the movie being great, the ending was great too. So, so many great things, and yeah, that scene really encapsulated the whole movie on this idea that the human characters are important, and you shouldn't just fast forward through the dialogue and just get to the monster action. Um, the human storylines are so good here.
Mm.
I
No,
have a question for Henry.
Mhm.
So recently, the director of Minus One announced that they're going to make a sequel to Minus One. Do you think a sequel needs to be made for a movie like this? Like, how do you follow up that
I know.
after
Wow.
that high praise?
Yeah, it's almost like you want to just leave this alone, you know?
Hmm.
But of course, like this isn't going to be the final Godzilla movie. Um, I mean, actually, Godzilla X Kong followed this movie, right? So already it isn't the last Godzilla movie. And now we know it's not the last Japanese Godzilla movie. Um, I mean, to label it as the sequel to Minus One is a little annoying because I would rather have this one stand alone. But it's sort of like this one was such a surprise hit that of course they're gonna like brand it as a sequel. So I get that. So I'll take that little annoying sequel label if it means we get more uh Godzilla movies from Japan, because clearly like these guys know what's up, right? Like I, I was mentioning how Hollywood finally kind of got it right, quote unquote, with King of the Monsters and Godzilla versus Kong. Um, but like Godzilla X Kong was pretty damn ridiculous, and it seemed to be like going down a familiar like bad path. So for Japanese cinema to give us this gem was pretty special. You know, it's like, okay, these guys created Godzilla and they're showing us the way. Like this is how you do it, right? So yeah, more more Godzilla movies from Japan. Hell yeah, I'm on board.
and like, what would you want to see in a sequel to this movie? Like, do you think like it should continue these human characters, or like just be Godzilla, say like 30 years later, 40, 50 years later? Like,
That's a
Because
good
would you?
it's gonna have
question.
time. It's gonna have time to regrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea what they have in store for us, but you know, what I thought might be a good approach is like they didn't really look to reinvent the wheel plot wise, right? I mean, the story was very familiar. It seemed very close to the original Godzilla movie from 54. Um, so why not sort of continue that? Like just, I don't know, retell past Godzilla movies, but have this unique perspective of important human characters, right? Because like that side of Godzilla movies we haven't seen as much. And like I would argue, like besides Godzilla Minus One, no Godzilla movie has really done that in a great way. So maybe they could just mine storylines from past Godzilla movies and just like give it the minus one treatment, and just have strong human storylines.
So, Henry, so would you rather have a, yeah, like human-centric Godzilla sequel to Minus One, or would you rather have a Godzilla versus another kaiju for Minus One sequel?
Well, I might argue, why not both? Right? Like when I'm talking about like revisiting past Godzilla movies, um, like I made reference to the color old school Godzilla movies being kind of schlocky, right? There's some good ones in there. Like even though they do look like two dudes in rubber suits like fighting it out in a dirt field, like there's a certain charm to that stuff, right? And I do remember seeing some Godzilla versus Ghidorah and Godzilla versus Mothra movies back in the day that were quite good. And so maybe we could have like one of those done in this vein. Yeah, might be something there.
Yeah, I could see that. I do like this Godzilla design a lot
Yeah.
too. So, like, even if it has nothing to do with the characters, the story, or anything for minus one, like, if it's just this version of Godzilla, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
But, but I
Okay.
would. Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh, all right. Are you finished? Because I kind of have a question for both of you, but only when you finish.
Oh, maybe I'll just give one last little statement. Um, I think it's cool that Godzilla is in such a great place right now. In the year 2024, Godzilla has been never been more popular. And I think there's this kind of cool understanding that there's a place for Godzilla in Hollywood and there's a place for Godzilla in Japan. And now it's sort of like each side doesn't have to do it all, right? It's sort of like Hollywood, you can make your big budget destruction movies and maybe don't worry about so much the human storylines. You don't need to uh get actors like Bryan Cranston and stuff, right? Because Japan's got your back. Japan can do shit like this and like, you know, bring people like me to tears and like great movies and like so I think it's cool that like there's a place for each and yeah, the Godzilla fandom's in a really good place and I am quite happy about that. So
Yeah, me too.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
Yeah, it is better than ever now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
70 years later.
Yep.
Okay, so I
Good.
have a question for kind of both of you. I didn't kind of notice this until Henry started talking about Minus One, but I feel like all three of our movies that we watched portray Godzilla as a villain, but we've also seen him as heroes, as a hero. I think that's just an interesting thing about Godzilla. He could be both a villain and a hero. Because, like you, Henry, like, we watch Godzilla because we want to see him break stuff and destroy shit. But Godzilla Minus One, we were like, oh, we don't know if we wanted to root to like destroy him. So it's interesting how Godzilla is one of those like figures that can be both a villain and a hero. Because yeah, like I said, like all three of the movies that we watch, he is portrayed as the bad guy, and that people want to kill him.
You have any thoughts, Christian?
Yeah, it is interesting because I guess because like he's such an iconic figure with so many movies that I imagine for that it's they probably like, oh, well, we can't have that be the villain. Um, we have to be the hero if we want him like to be this like enduring icon. Um, I guess that's not the case for say like every franchise, but for one as enduring as Godzilla. And also monster fights are just a lot of fun to watch. So, you know, we have to have oh, well there's got to be a monster that's bigger and badder that he has to take down. So like there's not many other like I'm trying to think if there's another franchise like that where you have a character that can be the hero or the villain of it. I guess you could say like Terminator, but
Oh yeah.
um
Mm,
that's kind of cuz there's all these different they're all different Terminators, you know.
hmm
Yeah, it's
So, but that
funny. Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was finished. Go for it.
Yeah, it's funny you pose that question, Porfirio, because I did think about that when I was watching Minus One. Like there's that moment I described where it's Koichi flying directly at Godzilla, and it's really set up to be the climax of the movie where it's like hero versus villain, right? But the more I think about it, it really wasn't hero versus villain. Yes, Koichi is the protagonist, the hero of the movie, but I would argue Godzilla is not the villain of Godzilla Minus One. The more I think about it, the villain of Godzilla Minus One is the Japanese government. And I mentioned Dr. Noda having these speeches about the value of human life and whatnot. And uh, he criticizes the Japanese government for not valuing human life, for having apathy for human life, right? Um, and Godzilla is certainly not a hero of this movie, but I don't think he's the villain. Like he's almost like the natural disaster of the movie, right? He has no, evil intentions. He's just doing Godzilla shit, right? He's Godzilla is being Godzilla in this movie, right? But the villain is actually the government, right? Um, so yeah, I like the fact I like this discussion because um Godzilla is a character that can be either, he can be neither. Um, I think in the Hollywood movies, he does tend to be more of a hero. Even then, there's a lot of gray area where like he's maybe his his success is sort of um uh, goes along with the human battle. Like he's almost an ally at times, but at times not. So it's cool. It's just another reason why Godzilla is awesome. You can't really categorize him as one thing. He can be a hero, he can be a villain, he can be neither. Um, he's just Godzilla, right?
Mhm. Yeah, he's a force of nature,
Yes,
a force so awesome that, in like the most literal sense.
indeed, indeed.
Um, here's a fun little question for you guys.
Okay.
Because we've been getting this is definitely leaning more to the American side of Godzilla lately, but we've been getting a lot of crossovers with Godzilla. He's been fighting Kong recently. There's a lot of like in comics. Well, there's like Godzilla versus the Justice League, and then Godzilla versus Avengers.
Hmm.
Um, is there a Godzilla crossover you would want to see on screen?
Godzilla
With
versus Pacific Rim.
ooh, yeah.
I said that without hesitation.
And by the
I,
way, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Uh, I kind of forebetted that question with that in mind almost.
Yeah.
but then,
I
like,
think,
who would you root for? I mean, like Pacific Rim, it's like they built that as like humanity's like defense, and so would that make Godzilla the enemy? But then, like Henry said, you can't help but root for Godzilla. So who would you root for in that battle?
yeah, that is a tough one because you want like Godzilla's so cool, you can't help but not root for him,
Yeah.
but you also kind of want to root for the mechs, because they're the humans.
Yeah. Well, putting on my Hollywood screenwriter hat, I think it would make sense if they had the movie be like um, Godzilla's surfaces and they they send the mechs to battle him, and we get an awesome fucking mech versus Godzilla battle. But then we come across like an even greater kaiju threat, where Godzilla and the mechs have to work together to fight it, and they along the lines of the Godzilla Kong movie, right, where Godzilla and Kong end up fighting Mecha Godzilla, right?
I was gonna say that just sounds like the script storyline to Godzilla versus Kong.
There you go.
But
And that's me speaking as if I was a Hollywood screenwriter that has very little originality, which is the thing.
yeah, it
We know
feels on very on brand for.
we know that.
I'd still watch it. I'd pay
Hell
money.
yeah. Hell yeah. Me too.
Me the average film goer would be like, yeah, something I've seen before, but a
Yeah.
little different. Sign me up. Like, yeah, maybe they'd fight like I don't know, like King Ghidorah or some sort of like army at the end or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think we all agree. Godzilla versus mechs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another crossover then.
Yeah.
I would like to see. It would be Godzilla's the MCU. Kind of, it would be Endgame, that portal scene, and one of the portals, Godzilla comes out and charges with the Avengers against Thanos' Black Order army.
Mhm.
That's what I would like to see.
It'd have to be one big portal.
Right.
Yeah.
Doctor Strange and Wong would be flailing their arms like crazy to get that one open.
Mhm. Look at the Godzilla, like, it's just they would just completely stomp Thanos.
Yeah.
Thanos
I,
just completely loses. Nothing bad happens to the Avengers. They live happily ever after.
I will say this, it would be cool to see Godzilla take on one of those giant like centipede-like creatures from the end of
Mm.
Avengers,
Oh yeah. I
Right? That'd be cool to see.
was thinking that, like, I was like, oh, there's a Marvel character. I think like you did see Galactus. Although Galactus, would that be too big for Godzilla? Like,
I don't know.
I don't
Well,
know.
that brings an interesting topic up, and that's the varying sizes of Godzilla. They seem to have him sized appropriate for each scene, right? So his true size seems to change
Mhm.
from movie to movie.
It's true. I do remember when the Bryan Cranston movie was out, uh, people said Godzilla was now too big.
Yeah,
That was a criticism of the movie after the Roland Emmerich one was Godzilla's too small.
right.
So
Yeah.
I kind of like him. Yeah, I feel like Minus One had a good size. I liked him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was not too big, not too small, and I feel like I think it'd be cool to see Godzilla fight like. I mean, just going back to the Marvel one. Like imagine like an army of Sentinels going back to the mechs.
Oh,
They're pretty
yes.
large, you know. There's a lot of them.
That would be cool.
Like if Galactus is too big, that's another like large size thing, for Godzilla to fight.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
hmm Sentinels or I don't know if I could think of something along that size for, I guess, the DC equivalent, but
Mhm.
yeah.
You could have Godzilla team up with Devil Dinosaur to take on the Sentinels.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Right. There you go. A very Godzilla-esque character.
hmm All right. Well, let's see. Yeah, I guess we'll time out again real quick for.
Okay, so I have an interesting question for you guys. Again, like this is a Godzilla legacy kind of podcast, 70 years. Like, in your guys' like opinion, why do you think we're still talking about Godzilla 70 years later after the first movie? Like, why do you think the creature's so beloved? I mean, honestly, it's just like I feel like anybody that doesn't watch a Godzilla movie just thinks like, it's a monster. Like, why? Like, who cares? It's like such a little kid's kind of movie of a giant monster that destroys shit.
Hmm, that's a good question. I guess it could be pretty open ended because Godzilla probably means something probably a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Godzilla is kind of a little more faceless. Say like, or I mentioned like James Bond and Superman. There's like, that's a person and they have like a specific character that they play, and you kind of see them go. You kind of see like Superman take on different bad guys, but he has like kind of his moral core, and he has other people that he interacts with. He has like a there's like Jimmy and Lois Lane, and same with James Bond with like um Moneypenny and all that. And but with Godzilla, he can't really interact with people at all besides, just killing them. So, and we've also mentioned how there really aren't a lot of good characters. Like we talked about Godzilla Minus One having being the first movie with good human characters.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with Godzilla, I think that I mean one is just like you do have characters with uh all the different monsters, which is a lot of fun to watch them fight. Um, King Ghidorah I've always loved. But you also have, Mothra and Rodan, and the list goes on. But I don't know, there's something very like I think what is it Godzilla kind of hits on these themes of like first you have like the idea of like kind of the nuclear these nuclear themes and that's societal and political, and how you mentioned Henry, the Japanese government is kind of the bad guy in Minus One, and there's definitely other Godzilla movies where it feels like the government is the bad guy, and Godzilla is a way to kind of tell the story about the government kind of through the eyes of this like natural disaster almost, and how they respond to it. And so I think you have kind of that kind of meaty societal political angle, but I think just the character is very striking. There's something very like just like awesome and like kind of like where you kind of look up at this character, and there's like a lot of fear and awe, and like um it kind of gives like a bit of this face to a disaster, and in a way, even though it sounds terrible, you just kind of can't look away when you're watching it on screen. There's kind of like it's this like destructive force that you respect. And so I guess that's my take on why Godzilla why Godzilla rules.
Henry?
Right on. Yeah, good question. I think it is interesting that this giant monster that destroys stuff has been so popular for so long, right? Because if it was just that, it would not have lasted this long. A giant monster destroying things. That's not
Hmm.
inherently interesting. Um, so I think there are a lot of factors in Godzilla's longevity. Certainly the character design, like the character design is great. It's an iconic look, and it's one of those things where like if you just see the silhouette, you're like, that's Godzilla. That's awesome, right? An unmistakable, awesome look. And the storytelling has been great through the decades. Great sub characters like Christian was alluding to, Ghidorah, Mecha Godzilla, Mothra. Like there's this great like cast of characters, right? And um, that I think certainly has helped the franchise stay alive. But you know what the secret sauce I think really is? I think it's where Godzilla came from, right? So Godzilla was created as a metaphor for the horrors of nuclear war and the
Hmm.
Japanese experience of World War II, including the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? And this is like real life shit, right? We're talking about this fictional giant monster, but it was created from real life human tragedy, right? So, how interesting is it that it is specifically the country of Japan producing these great Godzilla movies and the country of the United States creating these great Godzilla movies, right? Who just so happen to be the primary players in this terrible human tragedy, right? Um, a tragedy that again birthed Godzilla, right? So, um, behind the the fun of it is this dark human tragedy that we all have to live with for eternity, right? Like we as humans did this to each other for real, and uh, this franchise was it originated from that. So I think like there's this thing there, right? There's this inherent thing where um, everything that has followed has held some of that DNA. Even something as silly as Godzilla X Kong or like that weird like Godzilla baby from the Japanese movies. Like even silly shit like that, it all kind of holds that DNA with it, right? So uh like with certain movies it's more prevalent than others. Godzilla Minus One certainly speaks to that, right? But I think all of it, the whole Godzilla film legacy, has a bit of that in it, and just a little bit of that like real life human tragedy, I think goes a long way because uh, consciously or subconsciously, I think when we experience Godzilla, maybe there's a little bit of that in us, right? That's experiencing it too, where it's like, um, yes, this is entertainment, but at the same time, you're processing, you know, this like significant historical event that was truly a human tragedy, right? So, yeah, along the lines of a social commentary, right? I think there's a little bit of that in all of Godzilla.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. What do you think, Porfirio? Do you have anything to add or?
I mean, for me,
The
the
secret
most like
sauce.
the most basic answer, just I think, Godzilla's just entertaining as fuck, but I guess like what I've noticed is from the conversations we've been having is that Godzilla is also a very complex character, like he's a character that doesn't speak and maybe has just animalistic thoughts, but he's a unique character where he can be both the good and bad guy. He could be our savior, and that's why we enjoy all these like kaiju monster movies against Ghidorah, um, Rodan, and Mothra, and etc. etc. Be our downfall, and it allows room for these open conversations about like yeah like you both alluded to like the use of nuclear weapons and the distrust of governments and maybe even like I don't know, maybe Godzilla can also be like a reflection of ourselves when things get ugly and we just become this like monster, we just start attacking each other, you know? So I just think that this character has so many, it's so complex of being just both entertaining and social commentary, you know?
Hmm.
It's and and he doesn't say anything besides his roar, So Um, I'm just thinking back, to like our other beloved comic book characters that we adore, like Batman, Superman, Captain America, Iron Man. Like all these characters, there's been like many reiterations of with them throughout the years, which is why they've been beloved for so long. And I guess even the same with Godzilla, like there is just no one Godzilla. It's just there's many layers and versions of it, which is what makes the character so refreshing and so why we're so pulled to it like even in that 20-year span of Godzilla movie that we all hate and then once a movie that we all love and even won an Oscar for the first time of its franchise. So there's just many versions of the character that many stories that can be told with just this character.
Hmm.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So I guess to wrap up, we have a comic recommendation. So Porfirio, why don't you take it away with our comic recommendation for Godzilla?
For Godzilla. And so, Christian, you said this question earlier, like, what kind of crossover would you like to see with Godzilla? And so, my comic recommendation is Godzilla versus Power Rangers.
Is
Because
that a
we all,
thing?
that is totally a thing, Henry. So, in this storyline, um, Rita, she is trying to take over the universe, but I guess what's also a thing is a thing of the multiverse. So she goes to another universe, and it just so happens to be the one where Godzilla lives. And Tommy, the Green Ranger, follows her, and then sees Godzilla, and it's like, oh my gosh, Godzilla, enemy, big giant monster. So he summons his Dragonzoid, and then they kind of start going at it. And then the other Power Rangers, like Zord, um gets his energy and gets the other Power Rangers and transfers them over to that other universe, and then the Power Rangers again, I think it's just like this miscommunication thing, start going one on one with with Godzilla, and Reed is kind of in the background laughing and just being like, "Ha, losers, you fight it off, and I'll take on the winner." But it's a very entertaining series, and I do recommend it.
Good recommendation. Yeah, Godzilla versus Mechs.
There you go.
Always awesome.
Like we
Yeah.
were talking about.
Hmm.
All right. With that, we can wrap up the episode. This is farewell from Henry, Christian, and Porfirio.